All right, Jabosai, good morning. Today's nap is Membav. We have a lot to do today. The shir today is sponsored by Jonas and Kaplan and the entire 3200 block of Shelburne Road, with appreciation to Ari Lichtman for his help during the blizzard. While this is waiting. No, Baruch Hashem. I'm kidding. Shkoyach, Harry. Shkoyach. Okay. Where is the 3200 block of Shelburne Road? Are they? No. I'm looking for them. Around out here. All right. So let's begin. So Mem Vav Amud Aleph. We're picking up on Mem Hameh base 45b. So today we left off with Reb Shimon Gamliel. Okay, it's a long way up. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 20, 25 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, we saw yesterday a fascinating sugya all about what you do with tefillin that were written, or ultimately again, or found in the possession of non-Jews. Reb Shimon Gamliel seemed to espouse the position that even if you have a pair of tefillin that were written by a non-Jew, l'maisa, again, they are still considered to be kosher. So the Gemara says, is that true? Reb Shimon Gamliel, ibud l'shman boy, ksiva l'shman lo boy. So that's intriguing because Reb Shimon Gamliel himself said that the parchment for tefillin must actually be tanned l'shma. So could it be that at the end of the day, again, he requires a tanning l'shma, but doesn't require a writing l'shma? So the Gemara said this sign, Yetzipan zahav osha talalein or behemat meir. If the tefillin were coated with gold, or you went ahead and you used the parchment of non-kosher animal, so the halacha is it's pasul or behemat tahoro ksheros va'afa pishlo ibn l'shma. If you used parchment from a kosher animal, so the tefillin are kosher, but even if they have not been tanned lishma. However, Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer afilu ar behemat Torah psulos achi abdon lishma. Rav Shimon Gamliel says that the parchment is pasul until it is tanned lishma, or is that the actual tanning of the hide must be done lishma. Amar Rabbi Shmuel. So what do you see from here? You see that Rav Shimon Gamliel holds that the tanning of the hide must be done l'shma. If the tanning of the hide has to be done l'shma, could it be that he's machshir in a case of a non-Jew who went ahead and wrote the tefillin? It doesn't make sense. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Shmuel, beger shechazar l'suro. The case that we're talking about over here is with a convert who returned back to his idolatry. That's the case where Reb Shimon Gamliel holds that the tefillin are still kosher. Because again, even though the convert returned back to his former idolatrous ways, he's still a Jew, and therefore, technically speaking, the tefillin are still kosher. The Gemara says, L'suro, kol shekin dahavile min. But such a person, ultimately, again, is called a min, is called an apikores. So how could such a person's tefillin that he writes be kosher? Amar Rav Ashi shechazer l'suro mishum yira. Oh, what are we talking about over here? A person that converted and then returned back to his former religion out of fear. In other words, that there was some type of fear of persecution. That's why he went back. In that case, Rav Shimon Gamliel says that his tefillin that he writes are kosher because he still considers him to be a Jew, and we don't look at his return to his former idolatrous ways as a totally sinful act. Rather, we just look at it as something that was motivated by fear. To which the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanon, Ma'alin b'dimein ad kidei trapik. So remember again, the Mishnah rules that you are permitted to purchase Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzos from non-Jews as long as you're purchasing them at their value. In other words, you can't overpay for them. That being said, the Mishnah said, the Gemara said that you're permitted to overpay a little bit. You're permitted to go a little bit above market. So what's a little bit above market? So the Gemara says, up until the trapik. Ma'ik trapik, Amar Rav Sheshes istaria. Okay, istira. So you can pay up until an istira above. So this represented some markup above regular market price. So the Gemara is off with a story. Hahi tayasa da'isi chaisa de tefillin lekamei dabai. There was a particular Arab woman who brought a bag full of pairs of tefillin before Abaye. So she had all this tefillin. Amrlei, Yahavisi reish betamri. So he said to her, could I buy each pair from you for a couple of dates? So can I give you a couple of dates for each pair of tefillin? Imal Yezahira, the Arab woman became so angry, like a righteous indignation. That's all you want to give me is a couple of dates for the tefillin. And what does she do? Shakla shadatinhu benara. She took the bag of tefillin and she threw it into the river. Amr, to which Abaye said, Lo iboy lizalzulinhu ba'apa kulehai. I should not have degraded the tefillin in front of her so much. In other words, that Abai actually took responsibility. He said, it wasn't right. The fact that I offered her a couple of dates meant that these items were not precious in my eyes, and I should not have degraded the value of these dates in her eyes so much. Very profound story. So the Mishnah says, so again, we'll have to find the time, because the halacha l'maisa in the sugya about tefillin from Ovdei Kochavim is exceptionally important. This does happen. This absolutely does happen, where you have non-Jews who are trying to sell Sifrei Torah, tefillin, not really mezuzahs, but much more with Sifrei Torah. So again, the halacha is, we'll see, we'll have fun time to go ahead and talk about the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, the idea that one is permitted and even encouraged to buy these items, get them out of non-Jewish hands, but one is not permitted to overpay. One is not permitted to overpay, because the concern ultimately is much like Pidyon Shvuyim, that if you overpay for these items, then what? Then you create a market for stolen Judaica. And therefore, again, you're allowed to pay, but you are not permitted to pay above market. So again, we'll have to find the time to see this in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mishnah, Hamotzies ishto mishum shemra. If one who divorces his wife because of shemra, we'll say shemra means over here in this context that the rumors are out that she's committing adultery. She's committing adultery. So he divorced her because of shemra. Lo yachzir. He is never permitted to remarry her. Mishum neder. Lo yachzir. Similarly, if he divorces her because she's constantly making nedarim, he also can't go ahead and remarry her. Now, the logic behind this over here is the following. If you look at Rashi says Lo yachzir. Ba'afilu nimtzu devarim ba'doim o haneder etiru chacham v'plig utayma pligi ba'amarai ikal madar mishum kilkula. So we're going to see in the Gemara Machlokas as to why he can't remarry her. Some say he can't remarry her because if we allow him to remarry her, he could mess her over very badly. How so? Let's say he divorces her because word is out that she's committing adultery, or word is out that she's making the nedarim. And then what? It turns out, so he divorces her. Then what? Then she remarries. She has a family. And then it turns out that the rumors that she committed adultery were false. She didn't commit adultery. Or that the nedarim she made, he really had the power to annul them. So what could happen? He could say, had I known that you were a virtuous woman, I would have never gone ahead and divorced you. They will say, now what could that do? That could cast aspersions on the get. Under certain circumstances, that could actually negate the get. And it turns out that's what? That now her marriage to this second guy is in fact adultery, and therefore again her children are mamzerim. So what do we do in order to avoid this? In order to avoid this, we go ahead and we tell the husband, look, if you're divorcing your wife, it's done. Meaning, understand, you have no recourse. If you're divorcing her because of immorality or divorcing her because of nedarim, so you're agreeing now that when you give her the get, you are waiving your rights to remarriage. You're waiving your rights to remarriage. That's how the Mishnah passes. The Mishnah says. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, not every single neder. It depends on the neder. Kol neder sheyadu bo rabim lo yachzir. V'shelo yadu bo rabim lo yachzir. V'shelo yadu bo rabim yachzir. Rabbi Yehuda says it depends. If it's a neder that was vowed in public. So we'll say, so a neder vowed in public, which is a more significant, the other possibility as to why we tell him that he can't remarry her is because this is a statement to Jewish women that ultimately, again, don't engage in practices that make you look like you are suspect of immorality, and don't be wanton in your vowing practices. Those are the two opinions we'll see in the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda qualifies, and Rabbi Yehuda says that this doesn't apply for every neder. Rather, it only applies to the type of nedarim that are made in public. Because also we're going to see that Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that a neder made in public does not have any kind of revocation. That's when the husband can't remarry her. But if it was a neder not vowed in public, meaning it has revocation, husband can remarry her if he divorced her. Rabbi Meir says, Kol neder shetzarach hakiras chacham lo yachzir, v'she'ino tzarach hakiras chacham yachzir. Rabbi Meir says, if he divorces her because of the type of neder that requires sage intervention, chacham intervention, in order to annul it, that's the type of neder. If he divorced her because of the neder, we tell him he can't remarry her. But if it's the type of neder that he himself could annul, and he divorces her because of that type of neder, we do permit him to remarry her. Amar Rabbi Elazar, lo asru zeh, ela mipnei zeh. On the other hand, Rabbi Elazar says just the opposite. Rabbi Elazar says, we only aser, the case of a neder that requires annulment by a chacham, lest you come to a case of where the husband divorces her because of a neder that the husband himself had the ability to annul. In other words, Rabbi Lazar feels that the second type of neder is actually more dangerous. Why? Because wife makes a neder, husband divorces her because he doesn't like the fact that she's making the darim. Then it turns out that what? She remarries as a family. Then it turns out that the neder she made that was the grounds, which was the grounds for divorce, turns out that what? He had the power to annul it. So what is the husband going to say? Had I known that I had the power to annul it, I would have never what? I would have never divorced you. And of course, again, that casts aspersions now onto her second marriage. So Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Maaseh b'tzidon be'echad she'amar le'ishto konem im eini migarshecha b'girsha. So both listen to this case. There was a man in Sidon who said to his wife, Konam. Now we'll see what Konam means. Konam means literally something should be prohibited upon me if I don't divorce you. And then he divorced her, and he regretted it. He wanted to go out and remarry her. The rabbis permitted him to remarry her. Why? For the benefit of society. So we'll have to define in the Gemara what that story means. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi bar Yomi Amar Nachman. We'll say this idea over here in the Mishnah, that if a husband divorces his wife because of rumors of adultery, or because she's making nidarim, so the Mishnah ruled he may not remarry her. So Rav Nachman says that's only if what? That's only if he said to her, Mishum Shemra ani motziacha, Mishum Tapav Menvav, Mishum Nedra ani motziacha. That's only if he explicitly tells her, I'm divorcing you because of a neder, I'm divorcing you because of the rumors of adultery. So the Gemara says, Kasavar Taimamai Mishum Kilkula. Because remember, according to this approach, according to Rav Nachman, the whole idea why we don't allow him to remarry her in these cases is because he can mess her up seriously by claiming, after she's into her second marriage, by claiming, had I known these things, I would have never gone ahead and divorced you. So, I amar la hachi matzi mekalkula, vi lo amar la lo matzi, vi lo matzi mekalkula. So we'll say, so listen to this. So the Gemara says, therefore, if he goes ahead and he says, I am divorcing you mishum shemra, and I am divorcing you mishum neder, then ultimately, again, what he's doing over here in this case, this is where the rabbis went ahead and said, you cannot remarry your wife. Why? Since he made his divorce explicitly conditional, not really conditional, but he explicitly explained that the reason for his divorce was why? Because of these things. The concern is that if he finds out that these things are not true, he's going to try to what? He's going to try to void the divorce. And therefore, it's in those cases where the husband says, I am divorcing you because of shemra, or I'm divorcing you because of a neder. So what does the Beis Din tell the husband? No problem. It's your prerogative to divorce because of these things. But please understand that what? That if you divorce her, then what? You cannot remarry her. In other words, essentially what Beis Din does is forces the husband to waive his rights to remarriage, which is fascinating. Why do we do that, says the Gemara? Because we are concerned that if he does not waive those rights, at some point in time, he may find out that the information upon which he is basing his decision to divorce is not true, and he may come to try to void the divorce. That's fine if she's still single. It's not fine if she's remarried with kids. On the other hand, the Gemara says, others explain, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Yomi, Amar Rav Nachman, Sarach sheyomer la, he asked to say to her, Havi odas, shemishum shemra ani motziacha, or mishum neder ani motziacha. Rabbi say an alternate version of this discussion has it that when the husband divorces her, the Beis Din obligates him to say to his wife, I am divorcing you because of a shemra, I'm divorcing you because of nedarim. Kasavar taimamai kedei shlo yibnos Yisrael perutzos ba'arayos ubenedarim hilchach tzarich lemeimar lahachi. So we'll say, according to this second approach, we actually make him articulate the reason why he's divorcing her, in order that what? In order that she understand the reason why the marriage is ending, and in order that it should serve as a lesson to Jewish women in general, that be careful with your behaviors. Don't engage in things that will lead you to be suspect in your husband's eyes for adultery, and don't engage in wanton vowing practices. Tanya Kalishna Kama Tanya Kalishna Basra. So we have a brisa that's Shabbos. So you understand these two different versions are yielding two different. The bottom line is the same, which is that if the husband divorces his wife because of suspected adultery or because of nedarim, Beis Din says you waive your right to remarriage. The shaila is what's the reason for that takana? So our first approach says the reason for that takana is we're trying to protect the woman, because if it turns out that the information is not true and the husband tries to avoid the divorce, we don't want him to do that. We want him to proactively waive his rights for remarriage. Second approach says, no, this is a mussar, this is a lesson, that the woman is getting divorced because of, again, suspected adultery, because of wanton vowing, and therefore the husband makes an explicit statement, this is why I'm divorcing you, and it should serve as a lesson to Jewish women. Tanya Kalishna Kama, Tanya Kalishna Brisa. So let's say we have two different brisos. So Tanya Kalishna Kama, the brisa that supports the first approach, Amar Reb Meir, Mipnei Ma Amru Amot Yes Ishto Mishum Shemra Lo Yachzir, Umishum Neder Lo Yachzir. Why is it that Chazal said that if you divorce your wife because of suspected adultery or because of vowing, that you can never remarry her? Shema telech, because the concern is Shema telech v'tinasi la'acher, because maybe she'll get divorced and then she'll get remarried, and then what happens? V'nimtzu divarim badon, and it turns out, let's go to the adultery idea. Turns out that she didn't commit adultery. He was wrong. It was a rumor, and it was totally unfounded. And what happens? V'yomar, and the husband number one will say, Ilu hayisi yodeh shekenhu. Had I known that you did not commit adultery, afilu im hayanosnin lo mea mana lo hayisi megarsha. Even had they paid me $1,000, right? He's professing his love for her. Even had they paid me $1,000, I would have never divorced you. V'nimtza get batal ubanehamam zeirim. So we'll say, technically speaking, if the husband says essentially, I divorced you under false pretenses. I divorced under false pretenses, meaning I thought that you were an adulteress, and it turns out that you're not. Had I known that you were not an adulteress, I would have never divorced you, even had they given me $1,000. So the Gemara says, technically speaking, v'nimtza get batal ubanehamam zeirim. I will say, on a technical level, if the husband claims, I issued the divorce under false pretenses, I issued the divorce with false information, technically speaking, he could go through a process of trying to negate the get, which is very nice for him. Only one problem, which is now what? Which is that now she's effectively de facto committed adultery, and her children are mamzerim. In order to avoid that possibility, so what do Chazal say? Lefichach omrim lo haviodea shamot yes ishto mishum shemra lo yachzir mishum neder lo yachzir. Therefore, Chazal, as a way of preventing this from occurring, say to this guy, listen, we understand you want to divorce your wife because of the following issues. That's fine. That's your prerogative. But understand, when a man divorces his wife because of suspected adultery, or ultimately because of nedarim, you are waiving your rights to remarriage. You're waiving your rights. Tanya Kalishna, say that's the first approach. Tanya Kalishna Basra. We have a brisa that supports the second approach. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, Mipnei Ma'am Ramot Yesishna Mishum Shemra Lo Yachzir Umishum Neder Lo Yachzir. Why is it the rabbi said that if a man divorced his wife because of nedarim, or because of shemra, that he may not remarry her, in order that Jewish women are not be prudent. I will say that a woman has to be careful with the behaviors that she engages in, that she cannot go ahead and engage in behaviors that look like adultery, even in fact what? If the behaviors themselves are not actually adulterous. Similarly, that Jewish women have to be careful again with the type of nedarim they make. Lefichach omrim lo. Therefore, we say to the husband that if he's going to divorce his wife because of these things, Amar la, say to her, Heviotas shemishum shemra ani motziacha, umishum neder ani motziacha. We tell the husband, we instruct the husband, say to the wife, explain to your wife why you're divorcing her. So first of all, she should understand the grounds of divorce, and more than that, I will say, it serves as an example for Jewish women in general. Be careful with your behaviors. I will say, it's a very important yesod that, remember, we don't know if she committed adultery or not, or we don't know if she's making illegal vows, but in life, we'll say sometimes people go through life saying, I don't care what other people think. You have to care what other people think. That's the notion of Kiddush Hashem, Chil Hashem, which is caring about what other people think. And therefore, l'maisa, again, a person has to be careful that their behaviors do not give rise to the suspicion of illicit behaviors. And therefore, again, according to this second approach, we say to the husband, again, you can't remarry your wife and tell your wife that the reason ultimately you're divorcing her is because of these behaviors. So we'll say, so again, everyone is agreeing on the bottom line, which is that if a husband divorces his wife, either because of nedarim or suspected adultery, he may not remarry her, the fundamental machlokes is the reason for the gzeira. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kol neder sheyadu bo rabim lo yachzir, v'shlo yadu bo rabim yachzir. So let's remember again, in the neder case, Rabbi Yehuda not disagrees, but he qualifies. And Rabbi Yehuda says, it's not every single neder that this takana applies to. Rather, it's only a neder sheyadu bo rabim. If he divorces her because of a neder that is made in public, then that's a situation where he can't remarry her. But if it's not a neder made in public, then he can remarry her. So what's the pshat? What's going on over here? I'm Rabbi Shimon Levi. My time Rabbi Yehuda. What's Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda's logic ultimately is that a neder shehuder berabim ein lo hafara. That ultimately, again, a neder made in public is not subject to any kind of revocation. You can't revoke it. Therefore, again, it seems to be over here that Rabbi Yehuda is saying is the following: if he divorces her because of a major neder, what's the definition of a major neder? Like a neder that does not have revocation, then halacha lemaisa, again, he is not permitted to remarry her. So what's the logic over here? My time is Rabbi Yehuda. So the chsiv v'lo hikom b'nei Yisrael kinishba'u lahem nisiya heidas. This is an amazing pasuk. This is the Sefer Yoshua by the Givonim. Remember again, the Givonim were an indigenous nation to Canaan. They heard Klal Yisrael is coming into Eretz Yisrael, and they also word out on the street is that what? Klal Yisrael is charged with eradicating the 7 indigenous nations, or many of the indigenous nations. So the Givonim got scared. So what did? They disguised themselves as a foreign people from outside of Canaan and approached Yoshua for a treaty. So they lied. So it worked. Yoshua and Klal Yisrael made a treaty with them, and then it was discovered that in fact they were native Canaanites. So when that happened, so the pasuk says that Yoshua and Klal Yisrael did not kill the Givonim because they made an oath to them. Now Rabbi Yehuda assumes over here that the reason why Yoshua cannot kill them was because he made a neder berabim. He made a public vow, and a public treaty with the Givonim. So what do you see from here? That a public treaty cannot be annulled. That's Rabbi Yehuda's proof text. V'Rabbanan hasa michala shvua layu klal. So the Rabbanan say there was no shvua over here. After all, kevan da amru lahu me'eretz recholka banu v'lo bo'u lo chayla shvua layu klal. The Rabbanan say there was no shvua here. But so why was there no shvua here? Because the Givonim lied. Right? Bless you. Because the Givonim said we're from a foreign land. And what? They weren't. So there was no shvua here because you can't have a binding shvua based on a lie. So why didn't Yoshua and Klal Yisrael just kill the Givonim right there? So the Gemara says, v'hadelo katlinhu mishum kidushas Hashem. I will say, you know why they didn't kill the Givonim? Chil Hashem. Because here, remember, word out on the street was that Klal Yisrael made a treaty with the Givonim. So to now go out and turn around and kill them would what? Would be a Chil Hashem. That's why they didn't kill them. The Kamarab, so we'll say, so just in general, so what is considered to be a rabbin? Meaning we've established that at least according to Rabbi Yehuda, and the Rabbanan aren't disagreeing with that. The Rabbanan are just disagreeing on the proof text of Rabbi Yehuda. But a neder shudah b'rabbim, a neder made in public, is not subject to revocation. What is the definition of a rabbim? So says the Gemara, Rav Nachman Amar Gimel. Rav Nachman says 3 people. Rav Yitzchak Amar Asara. Rav Yitzchak says it's got to be 10 people. Rav Nachman Amar Gimel Yomim Beis Rabim Gimel. He learns that from Zava. That by Zava, Rabim means 3 days. If she has a flow of blood for 3 days, she's a Zava Gidola. Rav Yitzchak Amar Asara Dichsiv Eida. And Rav Yitzchak says no, that the minimum for a Rabim is 10. Where do we learn that from Eida? We'll say Eida is by the Meraglim. It's by the Meraglim. Remember again, because the Eida Hara, the bad Eida was 10. Why 10? Because 12 Meraglim minus 2 Yoshua and Kalev. So an Eida is 10. So we'll say, so again, they have a machlokes as to what's a Rabbim. Of course, again, the Rambam Paskins that for Nadarim purposes, so a Rabbim is 10 people. Fine. Rabbi Meir Omer Kol Neder Shetzarich. So remember again, I will say, Rabbi Meir on the other hand said that what? Any neder that requires annulment by a chacham, that's the type of neder that if you divorce your wife because of that neder, you can't remarry her. But another type of neder, ultimately you can. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Rebbe Lazar, and remember, the Mishnah went on and said, Tanya, Rebbe Lazar Omer, lo asru tzarich ela mipnei she'enot tzarich. So Rebbe Lazar, on the other hand, said, no, the real issue over here is the only reason the rabbis prohibited tzarich a neder that requires a chakiras chacham, annulment by a sage, is really because of the case of a neder that doesn't require the annulment of a sage. Now, what are the arguments? Rabbi Meir savar adam rotzeh shetispaze ishto bebeis din. So we'll say Rabbi Meir holds that a man doesn't mind if his wife has to be embarrassed by going to Beis Din for annulment of a neder. In other words, that if she has to get her neder annulled, she'll get her neder annulled. So therefore, again, according to Rabbi Meir, if a man divorces his wife because of a neder that required a chakiras chacham, annulment by a sage, we don't allow him to remarry her. Why? Because we're afraid that when he finds out later on that the neder could have been annulled, he would have said to her, had I known that you could have had your neder, I would have had you go to Beis Din and get your neder annulled. On the other hand, Rabbi Lazar savar ein adam rotzeh shetisbaze ishto bebeis din. On the other hand, Rabbi Lazar says that a man would not want his wife to be embarrassed by having to go to Beis Din, and therefore, according to Rabbi Lazar, that problematic neder is what? Is a neder that the husband himself could have annulled. That's the case where we're concerned that if the husband finds out afterwards that he had the power of annulment, that's what? That he would have said, had I known, I would have never divorced you. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Maisa B'tzidon, my Tana Diktani Maisa. So I'll say, so what is this? Remember, the story is a strange story. What was the story? The guy said, Konam alai, Konam upon me, if I don't divorce you. He divorced her, and then what does the Mishnah say? They allowed him to remarry her. So the Gemara says, what is this story doing over here? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you, there's a piece missing here, so I have to read it. When do we say that the spouse waives the right of remarriage? Kishan I will say that's only if she made a neder. Meaning, what does that mean? If he divorces her because she's making nedarim, then what? Then that's where the Mishnah says, we tell him, you waive the rights to remarriage. Aval, nadar ihu yachzir. But I will say, if the husband's making nedarim, if he made a neder, and that's why they got divorced, he is permitted to go ahead and remarry her. Va'amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. You should just know, in general, Chazal seem to feel that the issue of wanton vowing is an issue by women and not an issue by men. I don't know. Maybe that has to do with. I'm not exactly. Well, it could have to do without getting into gender stereotypes, right? It could have to do with the difference of the emotional composure between men and women, and the jumping to vow in difficult or stressful situations. Legal counsel? Is that? I've heard. I've been told by someone at Darfei, not from here. Right? So again, it could, which makes sense that ultimately, again, because of the more emotional nature of women, that it could be that vowing is a more reflexive reaction to certain situations more than men, and therefore again. The Gemara is saying over here that if divorce happened because of a man, if the nidarim is an issue on the side of the man, that is not grounds for waiving of the rights for remarriage. So the Gemara says the following about another ihu yachzir from Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Ma'aseh B'tzidon be'achar shomer leishta konim me'im yashecha the girsha, and the Mishnah supports this assertion by bringing down this story that there was a man in Sidon who went ahead and made a neder. And he said, Konam, we'll discuss it in just a moment. Konam, if I don't divorce you. And he divorced his wife, and the rabbis permitted him to remarry her. Why? Mipnei tikkun ha'olam. So the Mishnah said because of tikkun ha'olam. So the Gemara says, my konam. So before we get to tikkun ha'olam, my konam. So we'll say, first of all, what's the meaning of the case? What does it mean, konam? Konam alai im eni migar shecha. Now we'll say, remember, konam, we know this from our nedarim days. Konam is a lashon of prohibition. So konam usually means like this. Something should be prohibited to me if I do or I don't do something else. So what's the konam? Amar Rav Huna ba'omer ye'esru kol pirush ba'olam alayim eni megashecha. The case was where what? Where the guy said, all of the fruit of the world should be ushered to me if I don't divorce you. So therefore, how does it say? So he divorced her, and the Mishnah is teaching me that Chazal permitted him to go ahead and remarry her. Why? What's the message of the Mishnah? That the Takanas Chazal, when you go ahead and you divorce your spouse because of a neder, that you can't remarry your spouse, that is only a din when the woman is the one who's making the nedarim. So if she is the wanton vower, that's when Chazal said ultimately, again, husband, you waive your rights to remarriage. But if the husband is the one who is the vower, then what? If once he has his vow appealed, remarriage is been. There's another reason also, according to the first approach of understanding the Mishnah, that this is an issue of kilkul. They were concerned over here that if we allow him to remarry her at some point in time, he may void the get. That issue obviously only applies if it's the woman who's the vower, does not apply if it's the man of the vower. Therefore, Mishnah tells you, bottom line, this gzeira only applies when the woman is the vower, not when the man is the vower. They permitted him to remarry her. Pshita. So the Gemara says, it's obvious they permitted her to remarry her. Listen to this. What would I have thought? Meaning, what's the havamina? What's the havamina that because of the vow he would not be permitted to remarry her? I'll tell you why. So the Gemara says, Ligzor Mishum Rabbi Nassan. I might have thought that we should be gozer because of Rabbi Nassan. What Rabbi Nassan? This Sanya. Rabbi Nassan Omer Hanoder Kilu Bala Bana Bama. If one goes ahead and makes an eder, it's as if you've built an illegal altar. V'hamakaimo. And one who goes ahead and what? Upholds the neder. Ki'ilu hikrev ala karban. It's as if you bring a karban. So we'll say, in other words, vowing is not good. Vowing is not good. So I might have thought again that perhaps we shouldn't allow him to remarry her in order not to have him uphold the vow. Kamash Malon know that we're not concerned about his vow. So we'll both say, so again, the Mishnah, now, see, that last phrase is a little bit strange, because again, it sounds like it's going on the last case, that we allow the vowing husband, after he divorced his wife, to go ahead and remarry her. So the Gemara says, my tikkun ha'olam, what tikkun ha'olam ika is there? Amar Rav Sheshes, aresha. Rav Sheshes says, no. That mibnei tikkun ha'olam is actually not going on that last case. That mibnei tikkun ha'olam is going on the beginning of the Mishnah. What did the beginning of the Mishnah say? That if a man divorces his wife because of nedarim or because of suspected adultery, what's the halacha? What's the halacha will say? He may not remarry her. And now at the end of the Mishnah it says, why is that? Mipnei tikkun ha'olam, for the benefit of society. So the Gemara says, Ravina Amar li olam as-seifa. Ravina says, no. In reality, that last phrase is actually going on the case of the vowing husband. So what does mipnei tikkun? Abhalchi katani ein bazu mipnei tikkun ha'olam. And I will say the way the Mishnah should read is what? That there is no tikkun ha'olam in this case. In other words, that we allow him to remarry his wife, the vowing husband, because there's no issue of tikkun. There's no benefit of society being served here if we prevent them from remarrying. So we'll say, so the Mishnah ends off again with leaving the Takanas Chazal intact, that if a man divorces his wife ultimately again because of vows or because of suspected adultery, that we go ahead and we tell him you may not remarry your wife. Machlok is in Mishnah what type of vows this apply to, and also Mishnah qualifies for us this only applies to a vowing wife, not to a vowing husband. Also, you should just know in contemporary get practice, one of the things that we do when the husband gives the get is we tell him that this get is valid independent of any other conditions that he may have in his mind. Meaning we explicitly tell him that if you find out some piece of information later on, that had you known it now, you would not have divorced your wife, that you agree at this moment that this get is valid no matter what. We don't force people to waive rights of remarriage for reasons we'll discuss. But it's interesting that we tell him explicitly, you may find out information later on that may tell you, had I known this now, I would not have gone through with the divorce. You see, husband, agree to the fact that even when you find out that information, you are agreeing to the fact that the get is valid no matter what information may surface afterwards, to avoid these type of situations. Says the Mishnah, this is another fascinating case. A man goes there and divorces his wife because she's an islandess. And I will say, now, islandess is a case of a woman who can't have children. Now, remember, not just women can't have children, but also she's failed to develop certain signs of physical maturation. So he divorces his wife because she's an islandess. So I'll say, so what's the halacha? Rashi says over here, shelo hikir ba, hamotzi ishto beget, mishum islandess, shelo hikir ba kishakinsa, umikamakom tzricha get, te'ein adam osa bilas o bilas nus, ubalashing dishna. Also remember again, the issue over here is, what Rashi's preemptively striking at is, why isn't this a mekach tos? Right? Mekach tos. Right? A man marries a woman, again, marries a woman with the expectation that she could have children. It turns out now that she's an islandess. Why is it mekach tos? So Rashi points out it's not mekach tos for the following reason. Because they're both saying, when a man has relations with a woman, he does not want those relations to be a bias znus. And therefore, again, he wants those relations to be marital relations. And therefore, lemaisa, again, because of that, we assume that he has intention that his kiddushin with her should be no matter what the circumstances. But now it turns out that she's barren, that she can't have children, so he wants to divorce her. So Rabbi Yehuda says, lo yachzir. Rabbi Yehuda says if a man divorces his wife explicitly because she's an islandess, he may not go ahead and remarry her. V'cham l'cham say no yachzir. He can remarry her. Now we'll say, look at Rashi. So Rashi says over here, Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yachzir, shematina se v'telid, v'tomar ilu hayisi yodeh shekain, afilu nostin likuf mana, lo hayisi megashecha, uledas kin grashticha, shim yavo lecha simanach shachzirech, v'miadai shot hashuvi elai, ve'atru uyalele, lo grashticha, lefichach omrim lo kodim gerush, navi yodeh shamos yes ishum shum alinis lo yachzirin alama. So also Rabbi Yehuda says, here's the concern. The concern is she's going to get married to someone else, and she's going to have kids. And what's going to happen? Husband number one is going to say what? Say what? Had I known that you're not barren, I would have never divorced you. And he's going to try to retroactively negate the get, which I say could have catastrophic repercussions for her and for her second family. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, we tell the guy, look, it's your prerogative to divorce her because she's an island, but just understand that if you divorce her because of this, you may not go ahead and remarry her. The Chacham, on the other hand, say we're not concerned for this possibility, and therefore say that he can remarry her even if he divorced her because of islandness. Nises la'achar, get ready for this. So now let's say, so husband divorces his wife because she's an islandess, she gets married to someone else, v'hayu lo banim hemena, and she has children. She has children. So what happens? She comes back to husband number one, v'hitavas ksuvasa. And now what does she want? She wants her ksuva. She wants a ksuva. Rabbi says, so listen to this. Now this is actually very interesting. Now look, Rashi says over here, min harishon shotzia below ksuva mishum mekachtos va'ach shavnoda shelo hita'asal. So we'll say, so listen to this. So we'll say, so even though we said before, so remember in this case over here, he's divorcing her because she's an islandess. It appears that because she's being divorced because she's an islandess, that she's not entitled to ksuva. Why? Because even though we said before that a person doesn't want to make his bia a bias nus, and therefore there's no mekachtos, and therefore they're married, and therefore she requires a get. When it comes to ksuva, a husband is only mekabel to pay a ksuva to a woman who was capable of having a family with him. But if she's not capable of having a family, it appears that Lamaisa, he would not have to pay her ksuva. We're going to discuss this particular point. So the Gemara says, now she has children with her second husband. She comes back to husband number one, and she says to him essentially what? Hey, problem's not me. The problem's you. And as such, again, I want my ksuva. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Omer la, he could say to her, Shtikusech yafa midibureich. Your silence is much more appreciated than your speaking in this situation. In other words, he says, be careful, because if you're going to press the ksuva, I'm going to press the idea that had I known you could have children, I would have never divorced you. And therefore, again, I will pursue the option of retroactively voiding the get. So husband number one has the right to say to her, better for you to walk away from this situation without your ksuva, because if you're going to push it, I'm going to push it as well. Says the Gemara, L'meimra, Rabbi Yehuda chayesh l'kilkula, v'Rabbana lo chayesh l'kilkula. And Abba saying, based on the Mishnah, remember again, so the Mishnah said that if a man divorces his wife because she's an islandess, Rabbi Yehuda said the husband has to waive future rights of remarriage. Why? Because we're choshesh that if there's the ability to remarry her, if she gets married to a second guy and has kids, he may come along and say, what? Had I known that you could have children, I would have never divorced you. So he's choshesh for kilkul. On the other hand, Chachamim say, no, you don't have to waive your rights for remarriage because we're not choshesh v'kilkul. So the Gemara says that to say that Rabbi Yehuda is chayesh l'kilkula. He's chayesh he's choshesh that the husband number one may try to go ahead and void the get, therefore ruining her second marriage. And the Rabban are not choshesh for this. So we learned just the opposite in the last Mishnah. This nan hamoties ishtam mishum shemra. If a man divorced his wife because there was rumored adultery, lo yachzir, he may not remarry her. Umishum neder, and because of neder, lo yachzir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kol neder sheyadu barabim lo yachzir, v'shelo yadu barabim yachzir alma rabbanan chayesh l'kilkula. Rabbi Yehuda lo chayesh l'kilkula. Say in the previous Mishnah, we learned just the opposite. It appeared that what? It appeared that it was the rabbis who were concerned for kilkul, and Rabbi Yehuda was not concerned for kilkul. And I both say the way they understand Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned for kilkul is that Rabbi Yehuda only holds that the waiving of remarriage rights is only for certain type of nidarim. So see, the rabbis are the ones who are more concerned that we want the husband to waive remarriage rights so that he doesn't mess over his wife, his ex-wife, in her second marriage. And Rabbi Yehuda is not as concerned for that. Yet, in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says that we have to force him to waive the rights of remarriage, and the Rabbanan don't seem to be concerned for that. To which the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel Epoch, Rabbi Shmuel says, you're right, switch around the opinions. I v'hamid diktani seifa niseis la'acher v'hayu lo banim hemena v'hi tovas ksuvas. But look at the end of the Mishnah. So therefore the Gemara is suggesting that you have to switch around the opinions in the Mishnah. So the way you should read the Mishnah is the following: Hamotzias ishto mishum ailenis. If a man divorces his wife because she's an ailenis, chachamim omrim lo yachzir. The rabbis are the ones that say you have to waive your rights to remarriage, and Rabbi Huda says yachzir. And Rabbi Huda says he can remarry her. So but here's the problem. But look at the end of the Mishnah. What did the end of the Mishnah say? If she remarried a second guy and they had children, vihi tova asks suvasa, and now what? She comes to husband and says, "Hey, pay me my ksuva." So Amar Rabbi Huda, Omer La, Rabbi Huda says the ex-husband number one could say to her, "Shtikusech yafa mediburech." Your silence is better than your speech. In other words, be quiet, stop claiming the ksuva, or I'm going to try to void the get. Michlal de Rabbi Huda chayesh l'kol kula. So we'll say again, now this is Rabbi Huda making a statement. It sounds like Rabbi Huda is the one who's choshesh, that if we don't force the husband to yield his remarriage rights, that's what? That he could mess her over. To which the Gemara says, Ha nami epoch. The truth is, you have to switch around this also. That last part of the Mishnah should not read Rabbi Huda says, but rather what? The Chachamim say. Abai on the other hand says, no, the Olam no seifoch, you don't have to switch around the opinions. Rabbi Yehuda bahahi savar la Rabbi Meir, v'savar la Rabbi Lazar. So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda in one case holds like Rabbi Meir, and in the other case holds like Rabbi Lazar. What does that mean? B'tzarich, Rabbi will say, if it's a case of, remember, tzarich means a case of a neder that requires hataras chacham. So if ultimately, again, it's a case where a situation requires hataras chacham, savar la Rabbi Elazar. He holds like Rabbi Elazar. I will say, so Rashi says over here, im adam, savar la, excuse me. So bahahi, but tzarich, in a case where the neder requires ultimately hataras chacham, then he holds like Rabbi Lazar. Well, define this just a moment. B'she'enu tzarich, in a case of a neder that does not require hataras chacham, savar la ki Rabbi Meir. So let's work backwards. In the case of Rabbi Meir, Adam Yodea Sheyachol Lahafer Nidre Ishto. So because a man knows ultimately again that he could go ahead and be made for the neder of his wife, therefore again he holds like Rabbi Meir in that case. But in the previous case, he holds like Rabbi Lazar. What does that mean? That ein Adam Rotzeh Shetisbaze Ishto Bebezdin, and therefore again we're not choshesh that he's going to be makalka. So we'll say this goes back to the previous shitas that we had on Amud Aleph in the previous case of Nidarim. Remember again, the Machlokes Ramein Rabbi Lazar was, would a man want his wife to go ahead and go to Bezdin to seek out annulment of a neder or not? So therefore, let me read this again. Right? The Gemara says the following. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Meir in one case and Rabbi Lazar in the other case. In the case of Nidarim, meaning in the case of Tzarich, where the neder requires hataras chacham, he holds like Rabbi Lazar, which is that what? That a person does not want his wife to have to go to Bezdin to seek out annulment, and therefore if he divorces her based on a neder that requires annulment by a sage, we're not concerned that he's going to come back afterwards and say, had I known that the neder could be annulled, I would have never divorced you. But in the case of where the neder does not require annulment, in that case what? Savar la ki Rabbi Meir. He holds that Adam Yodea she Baal Yochel Lahaper Nidre Ishto. Look at Rashi, Rabbi Meir. He Dar Maseches Kiddushin. I'm sorry, actually not yet. So Amar Rava says Rabbi Huda Kashya. D'Rabbanan lo Kashya. So are you saying therefore again that the issue is only with the shitas of Rabbi Yehuda? The shitas of the Rabbanan also pose a Kashya. Amar Rava Rabbi Yehuda lo Kashya Kiddishaninan. Right? The Gemara says the positions of Rabbi Yehuda are not problematic, as we just answered. D'Rabbanan ad D'Rabbanan lo Kashya. Similarly, again, D'Rabbanan also do not represent a stira, because man chachamim, who are the chachamim? Rabbi Meir da'amar ba'inan t'nai kafel v'sivacha ma'askinan b'dol kafel t'nai. So both sides. So again, let's just go back. So now remember, we have inherent contradictions between the various shitos. So first, remember, the contradiction is between Rabbi Yehuda and this Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda and last Mishnah, Chacham of this Mishnah, Chacham of last Mishnah. On this Mishnah, it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda is the one who's choshesh for kilkul, the Rabbanan are not. In the last Mishnah was just the opposite. So first answer, the first resolution to this is how? is that Lamaisa again just switch around the shitos. That switch the shitos of this Mishnah so that they line up with the shitos of the previous Mishnah. Second answer is that no, do not go ahead and switch up the shitos. Rather again, says the Gemara, that Rabbi Huda ultimately holds like Rabbi Meir in one case, and Rabbi Lazar in a different case, to which the Gemara says, that takes care of Rabbi Huda. But Lamais, again, what do you do about the contradiction in the Shita of the Rabbanon? To which the Gemara says, that's not a kasha, and I'll tell you why. Because who are the Rabbanon? The Rabbanon are Rabbi Meir. Now, both saying, now what's unique about Shitas Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir holds in general that in order for a Tanai, in order for a condition to be binding, a condition must be a Tanai kafel, must be a double Tanai. What does it mean, both saying? That it has to be phrased in the positive and in the negative. If this happens, then this, and if this does not happen, then this. And any Tanai that is not a Tanai kafel is not a binding Tanai. Look at Rashi just a moment. Rabbi Meir, Darb Meseches Kiddushin called Tanai she'eno kafel ke'Tanai b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain. Any Tanai that is not doubled, like the Tanai of b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain, im ya'avru im lo ya'avru. So we'll say the Tanai was, this is when b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain want to sell the Transjordanian lands. So what happens? So Moshe Rabbeinu says, fine, but again he makes to make a Tanai kafel. The Tanai kafel was, if you go ahead and you go with your brethren and you fight in Eretz Yisrael, then the Transjordanian lands will be yours. But if you, but Moshe Rabbeinu didn't stop there. He also phrased in the negative. And if you don't go, then these lands will not be yours. So watch this. Let's plug this in over here. So the Gemara says that the Rabbanon of our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir holds that you need a Tanai kafel. The Hacham asking, now what's the case over here? B'delo kafel Tanai. The case over here is where there's no Tanai kafel. Look at Rashi. The Hacham b'delo kafle shelo amar b'shas gerushin ela hevi odas shemishum eilinis ani motziacha v'lo amar la v'im i'at eilinis lo yihei get. Oh, I will say, why are the rabbis not concerned for kilkul in this case? You will say, what's the fundamental question over here? The fundamental question is, in the previous Mishnah, the rabbis made the husband waive his rights for remarriage. Why? Because we're concerned that if he doesn't waive his rights for remarriage, what's going to happen? He's going to divorce her because of suspected adultery, and then what's going to happen? It's going to turn out the rumors were false. And what is he going to do? He's going to try to annul the marriage. And yet over here, when a man is divorcing his wife because she's an islandess, the rabbis do not make him waive his rights for remarriage. Why not? I'm going to tell you why. Because you know who the Rabbanan are in this Mishnah? The Rabbanan in this Mishnah are Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir requires that if a condition is going to be binding, what has to happen? It has to be phrased in the positive and the negative. And what's the case in the Mishnah? The case in the Mishnah is husband is divorcing his wife because she's an islandess. And by the way, husband is telling his wife that. He's telling her, I'm divorcing you because you're an islandess. So the Rabbanan say, see, the reason why this case is not problematic is why? Because the husband is not making a Tanai. He's not saying over here that's what? That if I go ahead, I'm divorcing you because you're an islandess. And if what? And if you're not an islandess, that the get should not be chal. See, if the husband would say that, then we've got some problems. Because then he's making a bona fide Tanai, and then really, technically speaking, if it turns out that she could have children, there are grounds absolutely for the annulment of the get. But in this case, there's no Tanai kafel. Because there's no Tanai kafel, even though he says that he's divorcing her because she's an islandess, if it turns out that she's not an islandess, then what recourse does he have? None. And therefore, again, there's no concern that he can undermine or negate the get, and therefore the rabbis don't feel it necessary to have him waive his right of remarriage. All right, we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with the Mishnah tomorrow. I'm sorry? No, in the Motzi Shemra case, it's a different situation because there it's not a Tanai at all. That's not a Tanai. That's